Is there a doctor in the house?
Yes. 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 I think very deeply. I think very deeply.
Dr. Brian Chad Starks.
I think very deeply.
Dr. Brian Chad Starks.
I'd like to thank Mr. Bill, as we informally refer to him from the Little Bob in the local gym here on campus, Dr. Bill Matthews. I'd like to start off by thanking the Department of Physics and Astronomy and the Delaware Space Grant, but more so specifically, I want to give a specific thanks to Kat Cathell, who is the Delaware Space Grant Coordinator, who some of my mentors and professors here from across the street know that I can be a handful at times, and she's been able to manifest my personality, my ambition, and goals in a much profitable way, so we can get some real work done in the Delaware Space Grant STEM. But more importantly, I want to thank the gentleman that has taken the chance on a trained sociologist that is a critical criminologist, I would say, Dr. William Matthews, who I met in the Little Bob as a doctoral candidate here, working on my PhD in criminology, and we formed a relationship simply around conversation and perspective. And it started off from a health component and playing ball in the gym with his two sons to eating lunch at a number of different restaurants on Main Street that I was not able to provide financial assistance. So I do owe him in that respect as well. But we took a risk. He took a chance. We took a chance that most academics don't take. And he introduced me to his colleagues as an equal scholar, even though I'm a part of the social sciences, and thought that there was value in what I believed in and the work that we needed to get done in addressing some of the issues that are not only limited to STEM, physics and astronomy, sociology, criminology. We're talking about the country. We're talking about the city, Newark, Lynchburg, Virginia, where I'm currently now. But these are issues that are facing us historically and in vast amounts that we have to take some time now to think about it in what I've entitled it in a non-traditional way. So we're going to have a conversation today. I believe in conversations, informative. All right, so some of my background. I do, as I mentioned before, I have a PhD in criminology from the University of Delaware, right across the street here. I have a master's in criminal justice, a master's certificate in alcohol and drug studies, and a bachelor's degree in sociology. I'm from Columbia, South Carolina. Coming to Delaware was the first time that I moved out of the state. Anyone that knows me, I love where I'm from, both good and bad. I represent them to the fullest. But I was in need of something different. All my degrees until that point were in a very conservative socio-political climate, and I felt that it was going to limit my ability to reach everyone that I thought my purpose was to reach. So I decided to leave South Carolina and come to Delaware, chasing Dr. Jim Ciardi, may he rest in peace. But I studied his work about war on drugs and his approach and his vision, and I wanted to become a part of it. So fortunately enough, I made a move to University of Delaware, and 3 years ago, I earned a PhD in criminology. So enough about me. Again, assistant professor in criminology, and I'm going to talk to you today about some of the work that needs to be done. So some of the work that I've been doing, I am currently a consultant for Lynchburg City Schools Division in Lynchburg, Virginia. Lynchburg City Schools signed into an agreement with the Office of Civil Rights in 2014 to address over-suspension and expulsion rates for African American males. And I don't want to insult the intellect in the room, but this is not an issue particular to the city of Lynchburg or particular to any public school systems. These are issues that we are facing that a number of states in this country, but also on a national level, is what is going on in our education system currently today. How does that conversation of education fit into structural resources that we know afford us the opportunity to be in this room today, while we still having the same conversation on inequality. And what I'm going to do today is talk about some of the ways that we have, and I mean we because it takes a village and a community, the ways that we have been addressing it and some of the ideas and the perspectives that we have and moving forward to address it in a more national perspective. I've also been training, doing professional development workshops with City Hall. As my colleagues know, it's not every day where an academic is welcome into a city and within the first 3 to 5 months, he's having a conversation with the city manager. So it takes both sides in order for us to get these conversations started. Someone is going to have to step out on faith and say, you know what, there's an issue that we need to address and we may not know exactly how to address it. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is that there is no all-knowing brother or sister. And it takes a community and a village of a number of interdisciplinary approaches and understanding exactly how the work must get done to meet the goals to give everyone an equitable opportunity to be successful. Not to continue to boast, but one other thing that I'm doing is I'm working with the Lynchburg City Police Department and training them on cultural competency and cultural consciousness with hopes to improve police practices. We are very well aware of a number of the situations that's been happening in this country in the last few years. The media does not allow us not to be informed, but it does give us an opportunity to bring awareness, strategize, and approach it in a different way to produce different results. These are lives. I'm very critical of the field that I'm in. We most often talk about these lives in a level of sensitive topics. And I would like to remove some of that language about sensitive topics and talk about real people. There are stories behind these conversations that we're having when we're standing in front of the classroom and delivering information out of textbooks or even some of the peer-reviewed publication journals. And I want to bring this story to life here today because these are people that we are talking about and people that we should be affecting. So, how did I get invited by Delaware Space Grant and Department of Physics and Astronomy here to give a colloquium? Well, as I discussed the introduction between Dr. Matthews and I, we were sharing research interests. And sometimes I can be very passionate about topics that I feel have been overlooked. And I expressed to him about some issues going on around criminal justice policies that I felt were targeting minorities, removing men from families, homes, and communities, and not giving everyone an equitable opportunity to integrate in a way that we learn from each other. And as I was speaking, he turned and he said, well, I think we have an issue here that you may be able to help us with. Delaware Space Grant was struggling at that time to create a community outreach program as well as increase the number of underrepresented groups. And underrepresented minority groups in this conversation extends past race. We most often think of race where we exclude gender, but more so we exclude the diverse ways of thinking. And that is what I am really going to focus on today, about the nuanced ways of looking at problems from more than one lens and inviting other experts to participate in solving some of the issues in lieu of just talking about them. So that's going to really be the thesis of the topic today, which is going to include some strategies on how to do it. Okay, inequality. Aware that diversity is an issue for Space Grant and also in University of Delaware, but it's across institutions of higher learning across the country. As a trained sociologist / criminologist, I am also looking for how inequality here intersects with other institutions. So we're going to begin the conversation today to talk about its place in the criminal justice system. Let's take a few seconds to look at the slide. And I'm assuming we can see the colors. Post-racial society. So how do we reconcile these diversity issues across so many spaces with the perspectives held by many that we live in a post-racial society where race is no longer as significant as the best or most fair or most equitable approach is one that is colorblind or race neutral? If you can see the different colors in this slide, it tells and informs me that it isn't colorblind. There's different colors in this model that you can't ignore. And if you're walking on any street on Main Street, if you're walking in the city of Wilmington, you cannot tell me that you can look in these faces and you don't see color. And I'm here to talk about why that is a problem for us in recognizing differences and appreciating and valuing the different beautiful faces and mindsets and perspectives that we hold in this room today. In 1960s, during that civil rights era, we focused on race. It was like the top of the agenda. It was the focus of politicians, activists, both black, both white. Everyone had an interest in understanding whether they were pro or anti this race conversation and how it played out in the civil rights era. Society was much more comfortable having these conversations being presented to us and trying to figure out what's the best way for us to create a more equitable environment to offer everyone access to resources. Interestingly enough, here we are, 50 years later, and we're attempting to strip race away from the conversation at every opportunity that we can. It leads us to major issues of diversity and critical competency in higher education and the criminal justice system. If you're saying we're colorblind, then do I have a gray face on today? I like my face. It's mine. And I'm pretty sure most of you like your face and want your face to be seen and recognized as yours and have value as well. We wouldn't ask anyone to lose their identity because it is yours. We wouldn't ask anyone to lose who they believe in, their heritage, their ancestors, because it's yours. How come as a unit now in society, we are afraid and ashamed to recognize differences? We're going to talk about recognizing one's existence, noticing my race, inquiring about my race. Isn't racism. Racism occurs when you use my identity against me. Sexism occurs, genderism occurs when you use the gender against someone. When you take the identity of a person or of a group and you acknowledge it, that doesn't equate to racism. Racism is the actual practice of discrimination. We don't have to strip race in order to address the issues of diversity. The higher education system and criminal justice disparities, they form a very symbiotic relationship. So let me be more specific about how the criminal justice system and education work together to reinforce inequality. Most of us are aware of the issues of resources in lower socioeconomic school districts and the problem that causes for educating young people. Achievement gap, not having enough desks, chairs in the classroom, not offering the same courses that's going to put them in a position to go to higher educational institutions to put them on a successful journey. The technology in some of the urban institutions, public school systems are not up to par as some of the counterparts in other parts of the country. But we expect that these students are supposed to overcome these structural barriers and participate in the most healthy way in society. I'm confused. How do we give one team more access to balls, bats, and the other team not the same access to the equipment and expect for it to be a fair game? We can both start off at the start line, turn the clock on, and then see who wins the race if we both start from the same place. High poverty schools. Math classes, twice as likely to be taught by a teacher with credentials and something other than mathematics in low poverty schools. For example, in some of the urban schools today, the math classes are being taught by teachers that have chemistry degrees. Some of the physics courses are being taught by teachers that have chemistry degrees. Let it marinate. What type of educational experience could that be for those students that do not know any better other than to show up for an educational opportunity? High poverty schools. Science classes 3 times as likely to be taught by a teacher with credentials and something other than science. We have some teaching chemistry that have geography degrees. We're just trying to fill spaces and check boxes. Who's been alienated and ostracized and forgot about in this process? The babies. These are the results in these low poverty schools. These are the results. And if you're looking at this educational lens as a structural problem, what's the relationship with education and criminal justice system? Low educational attainment? Does it force one to participate in criminality in order to feed his or her family? Does it put them in the position of 6-figure salary in the workforce? What is the causation, the relationship between the two? This, we respectively know, and we've heard of the school-to-prison pipeline. And we can understand on some level how it impacts this conversation. I mentioned earlier some of the work that I was doing in Lynchburg, Virginia. And we're discussing these exact constructs that we have here in this model. Suspensions, expulsions. When you were 14 years old, and you, let's say on a positive light, you didn't have to go to school because it was in-service day, but you didn't tell your parents that you had an in-service day. Please tell me what you were doing, home all day, or not home all day, where you were supposed to be in school. Could you have possibly been participating in some deviant behavior? Well, when President Clinton was in office, one of his first moves was to increase the number of community-oriented policing. Funds were dedicated for over 200,000 police officers in the community. It sounds like this was a good model in order to reduce the tension between marginalized communities and law enforcement, right? We're going to go back to the origination of how police used to be. And we're talking about getting cats out of the trees, you know, picking up the newspaper and walking into the elder lady's home and sitting down and having a breakfast sandwich and a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. This model has proven to work. Japan has the lowest crime rate because of their approach to community-oriented policing. Here in the United States, we have the same approach, but yet we sit as the #1 incarcerated nation in the world. I'm still a little confused on what we expect a 14-year-old going through the normal human development process. What exactly are the expectations when they're home because they've been suspended or expelled? It's like fishing in a barrel for a community-oriented police. If the kid is outside at 11 a.m. and that law enforcement officer knows everyone else ought to be in school, what type of interaction is going to take place when that cop says, "Hey, why aren't you in school, young man?" This is what it ends up being. That interaction in there, lack of cultural competency, not being able to communicate between each other, doesn't serve most of the citizens well when institutions take this approach, and agencies as in law enforcement. And this is contributing. I haven't even touched on the miscommunication and the issues in the school system. This is what happens when you suspend kids and expel them and send them home. Now, am I advocating to let every bad baby in the world stay in school? No. But we're talking about over suspension and expulsion and disparate rates of minorities compared to their counterparts. We want to look through an equity lens, an equity lens. If you missed 2 weeks of work and you came back after those 10 days, you didn't have access to your email, to your files, you left your flash drive at the office, how efficient would you be when you got back to your job? These kids have been suspended and expelled, don't have access to the homework, they're asked to come back after 10 days of missing class. Wouldn't your grades drop as well? So now these labels of certain groups being identified as not as smart, we'll say it, dumb. This is what contributes to that outcome that we must all be accountable in learning. It's impossible to ask these kids to not be in a classroom, not do homework, and come back and be the smartest kid on the camp. Why do we put such unexpected high expectations on 14-year-olds? We, as adults, are placing it on them. In Virginia, 58 of the offenses committed by juveniles were status offenses in the schools that if they would have been done in the community, they never would have been arrested. We're talking an educational institution that's supposed to cultivate the lives of our future. If there's a behavior that isn't criminal by the Virginia Commonwealth Code, how do our babies end up in handcuffs walking out of an education system? How does this happen? Equity lens. How does this happen? We can't ignore these conversations, folks. These conversations can't be had by just looking at data. You got to have these conversations in a much more succinct way, an accountability way, human lives way. Black males in particular have been suspended and expelled at higher rates. But there's a group that is slowly creeping up, and those are our kids that are faced with disabilities. And to the right, to your right here, this is a kid, a model of a child that has faced some type of challenge in his or her life. And we aren't set up to deal with it in our school systems. And most often, things that we do not understand, we punish. This slide here kind of sums up the disparity conversation. So you have one finger pointing at the white student, and you have 3 students pointing at the black student. Same behaviors that young white boys, young white girls are doing in classrooms are deemed as threatening if the same behavior is committed by a young black kid. And the majority, I have access to every referral in the last 3 years in the division, and you can see the response from the procedural justice side in our schools, that the kids are being punished disproportionately for the same behaviors. What factors contribute to that? Is it time for us to school our education systems? Most of us are aware of the disparities in the criminal justice system. hear the war on drugs terms. We hear mass incarceration. We just discussed school-to-prison pipeline. This kind of puts us in our face for all of our quantitative folks. I know my physics folks were starving for some numbers. So here we go. And we're talking percentage of the population and incarceration rates in jail and in prisons in the United States. Speaks for itself. I would like to focus more on how these issues and this relationship between the educational system and the criminal justice system impacts mindsets, perspectives, perceptions, standards, standpoints, and how these mindsets eventually become behaviors, and how do they play out on an everyday level. We're going to focus in the way we think about approaching these issues as well as our responses to these issues. Sorry, not yet. This is where the sociological perspective comes into play. It's very important when discussing how to address issues of diversity in higher education, NASA space grants, and specifically STEM for the purpose of this talk, as well as the criminal justice system. Interesting enough, the criminologist has the opportunity to focus on STEM, and I have no experience in understanding the hard sciences compared to the social sciences. I actually got a C in high school, the only one I got, in my chemistry class. I actually got a D in my first semester of my first chemistry class in undergrad. Needless to say, Chad Starks realized it was time to change his major. So that goes to a shout out to all my STEM folks in the room. All minorities, they don't see STEM as an opportunity for them. Why not? What are we doing as a society that we are limiting hopes and dreams in certain communities still in 2016? Why aren't our babies waking up excited, right? Because if it's a post-racial society, we shouldn't be concerned about disparities and bias. If it's a post-racial society, then there's an equitable, again, opportunity for every kid in public school. So why aren't our babies signing up? Oh, we too smart to say that they're afraid, the classes are too hard. We too smart to say that they have no interest. We too smart to say and think that they can't get the work done. But what is it about these numbers that are so despairing that we have to have these conversations over and over? Colorblind approach, an evaluation of application. Had a number of conversations, and I know some of you have heard of the resume studies. What does it look like when we put our names on papers and it goes into the hands of people making decisions on whether we deserve to be interviewed or not? My name is Brian Chad. I didn't understand what my mother was doing when I was growing up. I'm from Barney Forest Boulevard, and I see one of my childhood friends in the room that I haven't seen in a long time. And my name was considered a white boy name. And I had to deal with that very often. Didn't help that I was in advanced classes at the same time. One of my advisors here used to tell me, man, when you step off the plane, you're going to really mess some people up. It's pretty good for that to be a positive for me, isn't it? As I said, I get a PhD and the privilege of being a college professor. What about Tatiana? What about Tyrone? Unconsciously, do we look at these names and zip codes and do we categorize them based on those labels and stereotypes that are derogatory, preventing them from having a chance? Some of the research shows there's causality between the two. Good intentions. I am a humanitarian. I believe in people. I don't believe that the majority of the people in this country are evil or bad. I do believe that most of us have good intentions. Good intentions can't be the only method of making structural change. It has to be well-intentioned and focused. How do we become focused and match that with our well-intentions? I have this thing about being the messenger. And this is the language I want to use. I believe we all are messengers, and we're going to just generically say that conversation because we are blessed with access to information, and we can always stop to have a conversation and share it. And who knows what that would impact and change the perspective and the mindset of someone that did not have access to that information before they ran into you. You can stop and talk to the child in the Walmart parking lot. Those 15 seconds may not hurt you. Who knows what that impact with someone that doesn't look like them, think like them, live in their neighborhood, will provide a thought-provoking process about what life could really look like. Diversity should be invited. Difference should be valued and appreciated. So what do I mean by being the messenger? Increase in numbers alone doesn't necessarily bring about the change we need. Hey folks, stop checking the box that we got minorities in our classes in our schools. That doesn't address the structural issues that we're talking about today. It may make institutions and agencies, when we write up our reports, it may make us feel comfortable that we reach the numbers. But what about the lives of the people that we are using to reach the numbers? It takes a much more concerted effort to understand on a micro and a macro level the culture where underrepresented groups are coming from. Just because she's a female doesn't mean that she wants you to use her name and identity to reach your quota. Also, we need a shift in perspective, approach, mindset as individuals, as institutions. I talk about this as being the messenger, individually and institutionally, to cultivate a climate that encourages success for everyone by offering equitable resources, opportunities, support for all. So now we're going to talk about some practical ways to create this climate of inclusiveness and take being the messenger approach as individuals and institutions. Self-reflection and self-awareness. This is what creates your standpoint. This is the lens that you look through to create your perspectives on life, on wealth, on poverty, on race, on gender. And a great deal of it has to do with the way we were raised, our value system, the journey that we were on, the information and educational experiences that we had. What does identity mean to you? What does culture mean to you? Really, taking diversity out of the cloud and putting it on the ground substantively, what does a diverse population really look like? What would it look like? What does respect look like to you? What does bias look like to you? What does privilege look like? Implicit bias. When I do professional development workshops, I break my participants up into small groups, and I give them large sheets of papers and markers, and I say, you got 4 minutes to come up with a group definition of all those terms I've just listed. And I mean from law enforcement to school teachers. Can you imagine the difficulty that they have coming into an agreement on those constructs? So what can our babies do to know that there is a different definition in the institution than how I identify myself with? How I view respect and define respect could be different than everyone else in this room. If I'm not in a position of power, who's going to lose that struggle between the two if you don't agree with the way I identify myself? And I mean you as in us, the people with the resources. And I'm not talking consciously, remember? I'm talking unconsciously implicit bias. And these things have been ingrained in us for years. That idiot box that we all watch called television doesn't help us. The media continues to perpetuate this fear for us to be segregated and separated. We're smarter than that. We're much smarter than that. The difficulty of defining these constructs that impact people's lives must be understood. That 14-year-old kid that didn't go to school that day, what does respect look like to him? And how can that end up in an arrest rate? Your standpoint, all of the attitudes, identities, values, beliefs, and perspectives, that makes us who we are. The impact how you experience the world, and specifically how you experience discrimination, bias, oppression, both inwardly and externally. One of the things I do when I do workshops, again, with these definitions, is I challenge them to think outside of the box. Put yourself in the position of the people that we are asked to serve. How would they view these definitions? Can you come up with a different one now that we've exposed you to a different conversation? Being the messenger. I'm going to talk about some strategies that I use when doing the work. I think it's very important to have honest conversations. If you're a messenger, the first thing we got to do is be accountable and acknowledge that these issues exist. You have to admit that there is still discrimination and bias in this country. Once we can move past acknowledging the issues, there has to be a buy-in. And the buy-in must be top-down. One of the things I did when working with, on the journey to work with the school division, is I requested to meet with the superintendent. These conversations are not easy to have for everyone. I am very comfortable having these conversations. So my idea was, if I meet with the superintendent, then we could create a snowball effect. And if I can get the superintendent to buy in that these are conversations that we need to have, then maybe his principals will buy in. Maybe the assistant principals will buy in. And that can trickle down to teachers, guidance counselors. And what impact would that have on our babies if we start at the top? Fortunate enough, this is what happened for me to become a part of Delaware Space Grant. I was introduced to the director, and I had to get his buy-in. It wasn't going to matter if Dr. Matthews thought I could contribute something. The person with the resources of making the decision, if they don't buy in, it's not going to happen. Guess what, folks? Some of you are standing at the top of these ladders that I'm talking about. Some of you are in position to buy in. Some of you are in position to not only buy in, but ask that your faculty members buy in, your staff members, your children. Buying in from the top down is the process that we've been using to make some change here with Delaware Space Grant. I discussed the good intentions. Good intentions are okay, but alone they do not solve and address all the issues that we talked about. There must be a much more substantive conversation and practical implications to make some change. Accountability. Guess who has biases? Chad Starks does. And I'm very comfortable saying everyone else in this room also has some bias. Does that make you a bad person? No, it doesn't. It makes you a real person. Guess what the issue is? Self-reflection, self-awareness. Fortunate enough to play some football in my life and had a coach who used to tell me, young man, tonight after this game, and ain't gonna be nobody there but you in the ceiling. When you reflect upon your game, are you gonna know you gave it all and not let your team down? How many of you at night, when it's time for you to lay down, how many of you self-reflect about what you did that day in interaction if you discriminated against someone? How many of you are self-aware and connected to that next level of consciousness about whether or not you just created bias unconsciously? I'm going to challenge you before you leave today to do some of these things. And I'm going to ask you to keep tallies. How many of you jump to the other side of the street when you see a young white man with earrings and tattoos? Does he look that fearful to you? How many of us clutch our purses at the red lights when we look in the next lane and someone looks a little scarier? Unconscious, implicit bias. Doesn't make you a bad person. But it's not good enough to stay in that lane. Self-awareness and self-reflection. What are the biases that I hold? And how do I eradicate them? It isn't easy, folks, and it's very uncomfortable. It isn't easy. We didn't ask for easy. We all got to take a personal stake in achieving equity in our workplace environment. It has to start with one person. And I know what you're going to say. We got other requirements. We got to publish. Service is the third tier in R1 and R2 institutions, and I get that. I dare not ask you to lose your job. I don't want to study you in the criminal justice system. Who's going to be the person to take the risk? I know Sociology and Criminal Justice Department at the University of Delaware allowed their graduate student to influence them that we should start a series bringing in minorities to discuss their research. Ruth Peterson at Ohio State was the first person to come to what we now know as the Minority Mentor Lecture Series in the Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice. She pulled me to the side. She said, "What did you say to them?" I said, "Ma'am," she said, "you don't understand, do you? No one listens to graduate students." Sorry. Criminologist working with Delaware Space Grant. One of the top physicists, over 300 publications. Capital. He believed in the message. The department across the street believed that it needed to be done. They took a chance. And correct me if I'm wrong, it is a recruitment tool for students and hopefully for faculty as well. High expectations. I'm not here asking to change the criteria to get into the University of Delaware. I'm not asking you to change the hiring process to get into Delaware. I don't want you to lower your expectations. I want you to give an equitable opportunity, and you won't be surprised, and you'll see that the competition is much closer than you assume. Our job is to maintain high expectations for all students, as faculty members, that is. Our job is to understand structural impediments and attempt to address them academically. This is Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's an astrophysicist for all my non-hard science people out there. He's also a TV personality. I had no idea who he was before I met Dr. Matthews and the STEM faculty. There's a clip I want to share that I think will address some of our conversations that we're having.
But Tyson had to fight societal stereotypes to reach his goal. Because he is black, he said, teachers pushed him towards athletics, not astrophysics, which he called the path of most resistance.
When I needed to overcome the low expectations of others or the bias that would be expressed in one circumstance or another, I keep on keeping on. When I climb over the obstacle, go around it, dig under it, fly over it, that's what kept me going. Otherwise I would have never been an astrophysicist.
Can you imagine the impact we have on 9-year-olds when we take their hopes and their dreams away? Can you imagine the impact we have on 9-year-olds when we stop believing in them and lower their expectations? This is an anomaly, folks. This doesn't happen. Everyone doesn't have that mental stability and support at home to overcome the stereotypes and labels that society has placed on them. Everyone doesn't have the resources and the infrastructure to be tough, to take another one for the team and get back up and keep fighting. We should be tired of asking them to do that by now, because we see the results when we can show some hope and belief in underrepresented groups. There's the data for you. Sorry. Third point, get outside your comfort zone. Get outside your comfort zone. Challenge yourself. How many of you have ever been in a position where you're the only one that look like you? How many classes along your journey in your graduate studies to earn your PhD did you have a minority professor? How often were you the only person in the room in your classes that had a perspective that challenged everyone? How comfortable was that? But this is what we're asking underrepresented groups to do all day, every day. Women in law enforcement have to deal with what every day? Most jobs. What are minorities dealing with every day? Being offended, disrespect, but still asked to get up and come to work and perform at the same level as their counterparts. Internalize it. You'll be all right. That's just the way it is. It doesn't have to be that way. We got messages in the room. And from a micro level, we can change it, starting with each individual in the room. And collectively, I wonder what we could do. It's okay not to know everything, scholars. It's impossible to be all-knowing. Be informed. It's okay to ask questions about stuff you don't know. I've been growing my hair for 14 and a half years, for anybody that's interested. It's okay. It gives you an opportunity to learn, and interact with someone that you may not have ever before. Don't underestimate that value of social integration. One of the best things I think that happened to me is being bused in the 9th grade from one elementary school to another. Predominantly black elementary school. One teacher sees something in me I have no idea about. I take this test, not knowing what I'm doing. I pass it. I get into a gifted and talented program. Now I'm riding to school with my same cousins and friends. But I'm getting off at the bus, and I'm waiting on another bus to come pick me up. I go to a school that doesn't look like the school I just left. Now I'm the only one in my classroom that looks like me. Best thing could have happened to me to understand difference. I started doing camp outs, got introduced to Boy Scouts. Wasn't my thing. But engaging. Robbie Stone, Daniel Stones, Rob Gross. Still keep in contact with those friendships to this day. And it was because someone was a messenger along my journey and thought I deserved a better opportunity. And I was a school teacher. A school teacher. Just like us. Just like us. Seek out knowledge. Don't make assumptions. I don't think no one is going to accuse you because you are inquisitive and want to know. But sometimes our egos get in the way because we've earned the top degree in our field. And I've been writing about race for the last 30 years. Going through a peer review process isn't the same thing as interacting with the young man at the Wawa. Sorry, it isn't. That doesn't reduce the discrimination and the bias. They don't even read your articles. There's so much more we can do from the position of having resources and opportunities. We can be messengers. We can be messengers. Build trust and rapport. How often do you invite some of these students that are in your classrooms that may be uncomfortable? How often do you invite them to your office? 10, 15 minutes. Can you have a conversation about something other than your syllabus? Yes, you can. I believe you. Where are you from? What's your experience like here at the University of Delaware? Do you like it? Are you comfortable? It could go a long way for someone that's so afraid that no one understands and respects their identity. Social integration. Step outside the comfort zone of yourselves. Get uncomfortable to get comfortable. There's so many life lessons when we are uncomfortable that are valuable for yourselves, your families, and your community. Be uncomfortable. Fine. Cultural awareness and relevance. No heroes and holidays. Don't wait to February 28 days to talk about Black history. Don't wait to put the signs up for Women's Month only during that time period. 365 days. Incorporate into your curriculum and have some strategic conversations. Don't wait for anyone to tell you that you can be a messenger of equity and diversity. We don't have to wait because our government says 28 days is all the attention Black History Month needs. You don't have to wait. Dr. Chris Edmond, he's an associate professor at Columbia's Teacher College, has written about quote-unquote savior complex that gives white teachers a false sense of saving kids. Calls for a new approach that trains teachers to value unique realities of minority children, incorporating their culture into classroom instruction. Isn't this a picture, a nice picture? STEM. These are the future scientists. And we're talking about cultural diversity. This is it. This is it. And what this gentleman is saying is that you gotta learn the culture if you want to understand the population. What's the best way to learn something that you do not know anything about? Ask the question. Be informed. Okay, now we're going to talk about some institutional ways that, some things that we've been doing, and some of the things that are actually going on here at the University of Delaware now. Service learning. Not necessarily about increasing numbers. This changes the climate. It opens up more open perspectives. As a graduate student here, I work with another one of my colleague professors, and she has a course in Wilmington, Delaware, where she takes University of Delaware students. And she not only takes them to one of the worst neighborhoods in the state of Delaware, she not only takes them up there, but she asks them to participate in everyday interaction with the kids on the ground through sports. Service learning. I was fortunate enough, here comes the scholar in me, that one of the first publications I had as a graduate student is I wrote an article entitled Outside the Comfort Zone of the Classroom. And guess who I interviewed? Because most often as academics, whenever we do work in the community, we go interview the community and talk about the benefits that they got from our presence being there. I flipped it. I wanted to know what my college students learned from this experience when we removed the textbook covers to address the crime rates that we see in Wilmington, the drugs, the 98% African American neighborhoods, the broken windows, the social disadvantage. Guess what my responses were out of my 10 students that I interviewed? I can't believe that someone that doesn't look like me thought that a rich white kid had something to offer. Tears in focus group meeting from your students. Not bragging, but I got an R&R on that article the first time, which we know doesn't happen too often, so I am proud of that. But I think it was a unique way of looking at service learning, and is in some teaching journal, I can't remember right, criminal justice education, if you want to look for it. But there was a different way of looking at service learning instead of the impact to not only in the community, but what does it do for our students? And I mean, these are our future leaders. Now I feel confident that I can walk up to anyone and have a conversation. That's a quote from one of the students. We're talking 19 and 20-year-olds who have not had as much experience as my messengers in the room. Service learning is a very big key component. And I believe they're referred to here as transformation grants or transformation classes. And that's exactly what it is. So I really want to acknowledge that you dudes doing a great job at that. But there's much more in service learning that we can The title of that course is entitled U Street Outreach to any undergrads that want to sign up for it. Even if not able to teach a class, reach out to colleagues to see how you might be able to get involved. It's different in the hard sciences. Some of my physics professors, astronomy professors, we can reach out to the sociology, criminal justice faculty to see if you could ride along and see what actually happens in the city of Wilmington. Just to give you an opportunity to look through a different lens. Invite them over to do a presentation in class. Invite some of the kids over, some of the students. Interdisciplinary is the way of the future. At least that's the way we talk about it. Let's put it in practice. Community outreach. We gotta build relationships if we want to make change. We gotta build relationships if we want to make change. In this class, U Street Outreach, it was on paper co-taught by 2 PhD professors here at University of Delaware and 4 men from the community called Noble Players, a nonprofit organization. 4 members who grew up in that community and made a point that they were going to make some change and not leave. They taught us exactly about their neighborhood, coupled with the academic experience of my faculty members. What a great relationship that was. We asked the community what they needed, the students did. We need basketball courts up so our kids can have something to do. We got 248 signatures in 24 hours. Guess what Parks and Rec in the city of Wilmington did within those 24 hours? Basketball goals were up in a week. Do you think the residents themselves have not been asking for basketball goals for a long time from Parks and Rec? Why did they listen? Was it the 249 signatures that overwhelmed them? No. It was the name University of Delaware. It was the capital. And it was the right thing to do. These are the messengers sitting in the room. We need you. The marginalized, underrepresented groups need you to stand up for them. We need the collaborations. High school. It's not just a STEM problem when you get to school, to college, higher education. Our school systems need to be reached out, and we got to figure out a better pipeline, a better relationship to get the 8th grader interested in physics, science, astronomy. We got to do a much better job. I spoke with a couple professors that have already been doing this. Good intentions, great ethical care. Now we got to channel it in a different way in order to get different results. And that's what I mean by believing in each other and humanitarians. Some of us want to do it. We just may need some help. How can we ask physicists to understand cultural diversity when they haven't been trained in it? Interdisciplinary, come together to produce different outcomes. Kids in these communities should be able to see that people in our institutions care. We won't keep continuously beat down the psyche of the history of kids being bused from Wilmington and never looking out the window and saying, in 5 years, I'm going to be a student on that campus. We can change that. Institutionalizing diversity efforts. Training programs. Publishing about race or being well-read is great, but getting on the ground has a much more impact. There's an MGM program that focuses on helping minorities get into graduate school at Rutgers University. And there are sessions about how do you fill out an application for grad school? How do you write your statement of purpose? What's the best way to ask for a letter of recommendation? What exactly would the GRE look like? There are programs out there that are focusing, having these honest conversations and reducing these disparities in higher education. These are real community collaborations. I put this slide here because I want us to see that a paintbrush isn't the solution to structural inequality. Meaning, if you have kids that are different heights trying to look at a baseball game behind a 6-foot fence, and one kid is 4'2", next kid is 5'5", the next kid is 6'3", if you give each one of those kids one box to stand on, to look over a 6-foot fence, what's the probability that every kid is going to see the game? Oh, well, they don't need to see the game, right? We've done our job. We put the boxes out there for them. So now you get to check the box that you did your job. That's what I mean about those getting underneath those issues, to really paying attention about holistic change. What's wrong with giving 2 boxes to the shortest kid? What's wrong with breaking one box in half and giving 1.5 boxes to the middle-sized kid? Or taking the box from the 6'3" kid and say, stand on your toes for a little bit. It'll only strengthen your calves. We want to look through an equity lens. Equality is served decently. It's not enough. We want equity. I often talk about mentors, and term comes up, cosmopolitan canopy, that Elijah Anderson writes about. It's a place in Philly where, regardless of race or ethnicity or gender, sexual orientation or socioeconomic status or religiosity, where everyone is willing to offer their assistance in this space. We are a family. We are one unit. When they leave the cosmopolitan canopy, how quickly do we go back to the isms that perpetuate discrimination in society? We've had a great conversation here today, at least by my measures. I'm going to challenge you not to be a part of the cosmopolitan canopy. I appreciate that there's been some head nods and some attempts to engage and support. I'm going to challenge you to go home and do some self-reflection and self-awareness and see on a micro and individual level what you can do to be a messenger, to create a holistic environment on a macro level, to make institutional change in society. Thank you.